Hello, I'm the Pineapple Grenader and welcome to my channel. If you've seen any of the thumbnails on my videos, then you know that I really love drawing. I love drawing fan art, but I also love drawing original characters and original stories. One of my big dreams is to become a really big comic artist who creates stories that astound and wonder, but sometimes it feels really hard to reach that dream. One of my challenges that I wanted to give to myself to help me grow as an artist and as a storyteller was to work on a comic project and then detail my progress developing my artistic skills and my comic skills at the end of the year. This is the second video in a series of videos where I detail my progress growing as a comic artist. The project I've been working on, which I started last year, was a fan comic for the Disney Channel TV show The Ghost and Molly McGee. The comic is called Molly McGee Image of the Week. It is a Disney Channel crossover comic, and the comic revolves around the titular Molly McGee as she makes a fan comic of all these various Disney Channel characters as the author and a character in her own comic that has granted her an immense amount of power over the universe, and antics ensue. In this video, I'll be going over some of the influences on my progress of the comic, as well as the various comics themselves. We'll be going over my progress in my art development and in my writing progress, as well as going over some goals that I have for next year, as well as some challenges that I faced this year in regards to trying to focus on the comic and its growth. So yeah, I just want to, before I start, I want to give a few very brief, very light warnings. If for whatever I mentioned in regards to this comic interests you and you want to jump in, I'll have some links in the description to the comic and the various other sites that you can read it. There will be spoilers for the comic, so if you want to go in blind, I'll have those links there. But also, this comic is a fan comic of various Disney Channel shows, so there may be spoilers for those shows as well. So be warned. Alright, so I think the first thing I want to do before we jump into everything is probably just take a quick recap of the things I went over in the first video, as well as my history with making comics. So I've been drawing ever since I could pick up a pencil, and I've been making comics just as early as that. I've made 3 attempts before starting Molly McGee Image of the Week to make a webcomic. The second attempt was successful. I was able to make a full issue and a few miscellaneous strips, but I wasn't able to make a lot of really good progress in regards to maintaining momentum, building up a queue and a backlog, and consistently working on this comic. And it was all throughout these various comics I had a lot of anxiety in regards to whether or not I was good enough, whether my skills and my writing skills were good enough to make something that people would like. And that's always been a challenge, and I realized that maybe my ambitions or my dreams for these projects were maybe a little bit too high for the skill set that I had. So I figured I would scale down my expectations for these comics and just focus on building up the muscle memory that I need to make these comics. Initially, the latest idea I had for a comic before starting Molly McGee Image of the Week was going to be a comic anthology. Rather than focusing on one core story, I'd do a bunch of shorter stories. The first iteration of this idea, I had this idea about intersplicing both original stories and fan comics and stuff. I had a lot of different ideas for random comic strips featuring different TV shows and games that I liked. Lots of very kind of ironic stuff. Yeah, and I liked that idea, but then I realized that my original stories and my fan stories had different tones, and so I felt like maybe it might be a good idea to maybe separate them. I eventually ditched the idea of doing original comics. Making a separate comic for fan comics, but the idea still lingered around in my head. I thought to myself, there wasn't really a whole lot of super funny fan comics for Molly McGee, which was a show I started watching a little bit last year. I enjoyed the show a lot. It was fun. It was around that time where I wasn't watching a whole lot of TV, and I I just kind of got into the show, and it was really fun. I had some issues with it, but I thought it had a lot of potential, and I wanted to kind of I thought the show was really charming, but I wanted to say something nice about it. So I ended up making the Scratch character exploration video because I figured, maybe I could say something nice about this show that I like a lot. And in the process of making that video, I found myself really liking Molly McGee a lot. I really liked its characters. I loved its art direction. I loved all the voice casts. And I just had a lot of fun with the characters, and I had a lot of fun with the story. And I thought it would be really fun to maybe take a crack at actually making a fan comic. I haven't really done anything like that in the past. I did take a crack at like coming up with like show pitches for like fan shows when I was a little kid, but that was just like stuff that was in my head. I never wrote any of that stuff down. So this was my first time essentially making fan fiction, and I think I did a pretty good job. A lot of my very first comics were really rough. I think I can make some really nice illustrations, but for some reason, the art of creating sequential like comic art really made me realize that I had a lot of work that I had to do in regards to making nice drawings and making drawings that felt really solid and looked appealing. I liked my writing though. I really liked my writing in regards to the different jokes that I was able to develop with these characters, and it got so far that I kind of started brainstorming different approaches to this comic that I was developing. I was developing a different approach to how I wanted to write the story. My ambitions grew essentially, and I thought to myself, what if this comic had like an overarching story with a character development and themes and stuff? Essentially, I wanted the big gag to be that there's like, there are essentially two types of stories that you get. You get like these highly emotional character breakdowns with like lore and stuff and big action, big shonen anime fights, and then you'd have like a random like semi-ironic comic strip on the other side, and you'd have these two different kinds of comics intersecting with each other. And my first attempt at that was my very first long-form comic arc or comic story in a long time. I wrote 12 pages of a long-form comic, which was called the Head Lice arc. It was the very first introduction of the overarching theme of like Molly having all of this like immense power and stuff, and it was the introduction of this weird gag that I was developing, and I thought it would be fun to really re-examine the way I was approaching the character of Molly McGee and how I wrote her specifically. It was a big challenge. A lot of that had to do with the fact that once again, drawing a whole bunch of drawings in succession really revealed how much I still needed to learn about art. And in general, it was the first time in a while that I was really trying to create something that was genuine, that I had a distinct emotion to. A lot of that comic was really kind of about the dissonance between, the creator and the audience, trying to create something that you realize isn't vibing with people. Even though it was under the vein of like something really random instead of like giving everybody in the universe head lice. That was something that I personally experienced, and it was kind of something I wanted to put into the comic. And I guess I was kind of afraid of sounding really cringe. I didn't want to make something that seemed really lame and corny. I haven't gotten a whole lot of response. That's not true. I did get a lot of response. People really liked the one part that I was really afraid to make. And it was really rewarding. It was really rewarding to make something that people could vibe with. In general, I am really happy at the little community and audience I was able to develop with the comic. And I went into 2024 with a lot of excitement for the future. I always had a lot of big plans and big dreams for my past comic projects, but either due to like time or motivation or anxiety, I wasn't able to really get the ball rolling and really make some actual momentum with these comic projects. With Molly McGee Image of the Week, it's really the first project I've made really ever, maybe outside of like my YouTube channels, that I was really making something that really felt like it was the stepping stones to something bigger. I really felt like, like once I get out of this project, I'll be a better artist. and a better creator and have a better understanding of how I like to write stories and such. I really felt like it was the stepping stones to something greater. Yeah, and I was just really happy with the stuff I was able to create in 2023. I still read some of those old strips, and they still make me laugh. And there's even some drawings that I still think are really cool. Yeah, so yeah, that was kind of what happened in 2023. It was just really me trying to get my bearings, learning a little bit more about creating art and creating comics. And that was really the start of it. That was the start of this very silly comic. Real briefly, I think it'd be fun just to kind of go over a few smaller points in regards to the comic. So initially, it was really just like a bunch of random like concepts in regards to how I want to approach the character, the characters of these various Disney Channel shows. It was really just like a collection of stuff I just thought would be really funny. There was a huge focus on kind of like exploring character dynamics and exploring the ranges at which you could push these characters and where you could push them into new directions, essentially. Molly in the TV show is this very enthusiastic, very amicable, very friendly character who's very excited about trying to make improvements to her community. I ended up kind of like exploring the concept of like pushing that excitement in different directions and just making her more of like this very manic character who's always sort of inadvertently causing chaos. In the early comics, that chaos was very social. She was kind of a very loud character, a very sardonic character, and she was always kind of just causing a lot of weird like chaos from a social standpoint. I also introduced a lot of really weird interests for Molly. There were a lot of early comics that revolved around her really liking fighting games for some reason, because I really wanted to have some sort of weird throwback to those early 2000s comics where people were always talking about like Halo or whatever. It was also kind of a big challenge for me to try and emulate the style of the Ghost and Molly McGee. I like my own style, but sometimes it always felt like it was a crutch. So I had a lot of challenge trying to figure out a way to bridge the gap between my own style and the Molly style. Another thing too, in going back to character dynamics, I introduced the crossover aspect with a few characters from other shows. Some of the first few characters who showed up in the comic were Dipper from Gravity Falls, Anne from Amphibia, Luce from The Owl House, Wander from Wander Over Yonder, and a lot of these early comics were these characters interacting with each other and overall trying to develop like this relationship between these characters. These characters were essentially a big friend group, and so it was fun to try and explore new facets of these characters. Luce and Anne were kind of like these like very exhausted big sisters to Molly, who kind of had to put up with this like all this weird stuff that she was into. This very big, loud personality. Everyone else kind of just had folded behind it, but they're the only people who can like kind of see behind her facade. This big sense of grandeur that she gave to herself. I don't know. It was just kind of a fun dynamic. And then I'll get to Dipper when I get into this year's comics. But Dipper was a fun one too. I realized really early on that having a story where everybody gets along, you don't have a whole lot of conflict. So I kind of had to I had to find somebody who would be like the party pooper, essentially, the Squidward. And I thought it would be really funny if it was Dipper. I think it would be fun. I thought it would be fun if Dipper was one of the few characters who didn't want to be here, who didn't want to be like play. He wanted to be play a part of the team. I want to elaborate more on this dynamic, this relationship in the future with future stories. But the short, non-spoiler version of this dynamic is that essentially he doesn't want to be a part of this comic. He wants to go home. He wants to have normal Gravity Falls adventures, but he's stuck here with Molly. My main idea I had for these characters was that Molly is a fan of other Disney Channel shows, and so my idea was that she would have this sort of like parasocial, like celebrity fan dynamic with a lot of these characters. But as time went on, she actually developed real, tangible friendships with these characters. Everybody except for Dipper. That was kind of the idea I had with their dynamic, is this sort of parasocial. You see this person on social media with like tons of followers and views and stuff, and you like look up to them, and they don't really see you the same way. That was kind of the dynamic I wanted to have between Dipper and Molly. Molly as this fan who wants to transition into being a friend, and Dipper trying to keep his space. So those were some of the core kinds of ideas I was exploring in the first year of the comic, was this dynamic between these characters, this sort of emerging friend group, and Molly having these ambitions of grandeur, hoping to be like someone who can stand toe-to-toe with these big Disney legends, and also making fun comics that make people laugh. So yeah, that was sort of the basic idea, was sort of re-examining these characters from these shows that I liked a lot, trying to explore like new stories we could tell with these characters. That was the direction. I had a lot of fun writing these comics, and I wanted to see if I could push myself to try and sow the seeds of some serialization, and so it's like start the stepping stones to make another really big story. So that's what we're going to explore. But before we get into that, I think I'd like to take the time to talk about some influences on the comic. So yeah, we're going to do that next. There's a few influences that changed the trajectory of the comic, how much I was able to progress in the comic, how I thought and approached art, and also various other influences that also influenced the initial setup of the comic. So I wanted to go over some things. The first thing that I wanted to go over was Operation Enhappification. This was a project that I was working with the social media team. Long Live the Ghost and Molly McGee was a social media team that's like kind of focused, providing awareness not just for the show, but also towards doing charity work for various charities, and spreading the message of enhappification and helping people through the show. I believe very early this year, I believe January or February. Actually, I think maybe like right after I finished the first video, Sunnyland Productions, which is another YouTuber that does a lot of YouTube videos on Disney parks and Molly McGee and stuff. They contacted me. A few people from Long Live the Ghost and Molly McGee contacted me on Tumblr in regards to helping out with this project and providing some art and stuff. And I was like, oh yeah, that sounds like fun. I have never been a part of like these larger, really, really large projects. I think the most collaboration I've done have been a part of zines, but a lot of times it's usually just, you draw a picture and you post your final stuff, and then the project is done. I've never been a part of the nitty-gritty of developing it. So this was really exciting. Another exciting thing too was meeting a lot of other Molly McGee fans. I'm not really a fandom guy. I'm not really like talking and creating theories and fan fiction and stuff. I'm usually in my own little island and maybe talk to like a friend or two about some stuff. And that's really it. How people perceived the Ghost and Molly McGee was a mystery to me. I was an island unto myself. I really didn't know how people perceived the show or how popular it was. So it was really exciting to meet other people who made Molly McGee fan art, and other people who also enjoyed the show as well. It was really exciting to be a part of that team. My core function within that team was to help develop some art assets for this big stream that they were doing. Let me see here. I gotta look at some stuff. So in March, they were working towards creating a big 6-hour live stream that was raising funds for Give the Kids the World Village, which was a nonprofit park for terminally ill children. A lot of the Ghost and Molly McGee crew were there, as well as some people from that charity who came on that stream. They talked about developing the show. They did a whole bunch of fun little games and Q&A stuff. It was a lot of fun. I did watch the recap. I wasn't really on the stream, but my main priority in that project was making some art assets for the stream itself. I made some art for the stream in regards to whenever they had to stop and let people know that they were having technical difficulties or whatever, or just thanking people for joining the stream or whatever. I made art for the progress bar showing the amount of donations. I made a decent amount of art. My thought process going into this project was, okay, so this is going to be a really big project. This art is probably going to be seen by a lot of people as well as the crew. So I wanted to challenge myself to try and make something that fit the show. I wanted to try and challenge myself to try and focus on making something that felt really close to how the show looked. That was my core goal with developing it. And it was a challenge because before then I wasn't really paying a whole lot of attention to the specific rules that the show governs itself artistically. I wasn't really thinking about that. I was really just kind of, I was filtering Molly and Scratch and Daryl and all these other characters through my art style. I wasn't trying to follow the rules of the Ghost and Molly McGee. And so that was a big challenge because I really wanted to try and get to as close as possible. And this really, really informed the way I drew Molly going forward. Not just her, but other characters. And even other characters who showed up in other shows. It was a different way of thinking, just like paying more attention to the way proportions are drawn, or the way line weight and stuff, and all the specific rules in regards to characters and stuff like that. I think one thing I really liked in some of these drawings that I did was my approach to texture work. I tend to be really sort of I want to say like haphazard or like improvisational in regards to like texture work, but I ended up using a few different textures in regards to the backgrounds because I wanted to have that sort of like gritty, spooky look that a lot of the backgrounds and the title cards had for Molly McGee. And like I said before, I challenged myself to try and keep characters on model. The weird thing though was that a lot of people, like when I ended up posting all the art I made for the project, a lot of people came up to me and they're like, "Hey man, I noticed your style. It was so cool to see you on the stream." And I was like, that's cool, man. It was weird, right? Like it was cool, like people really liking the art that I made, but it was also kind of weird because it almost made me feel like I failed in my goals, right? I was trying to get as close as possible to the show's style, and everybody was able to instantly recognize my art style. And it was kind of a weird feeling, but it was fun being really challenged to try and push myself to make something really cool. A lot of the stuff was probably some of my favorite stuff I made in 2024, especially this one drawing I made for the outro. It didn't get used because I think the art that we actually used for the outro was amazing. That was another thing too. I wasn't the only artist on this team. There's a lot of other people who are contributing work to this live stream and the encore. I know on the stream there was also a group animation project that was also being featured as well. There's a lot of really good talent in the Molly McGee fandom and on this team. There's a lot of really amazing artists, and that kind of lit a little like competitive spirit in me. Like I was like, man, I gotta up my game. There's a lot of competition here. I gotta up the ante. There's a lot of really strong artists on this team, and a lot of strong artists in the Molly McGee fandom. I think coming off of my island and recognizing the wealth of talent in this fandom and the wealth of talent of people working on our team made me realize that I have a lot of growth that I have to go through. But yeah, I was like, I remember I made the outro drawing, and I saw someone who also made an outro drawing, and I was like, no, you gotta use this. This rules. Like it was really good, and they even animated it. It was like this really cool piece of everyone hanging out by a fireplace. It looks really good, and I'm happy that they used it. But yeah, this was the initial outro piece that I used, that I drew initially. And even though it didn't get used in the live stream, it still is probably like my favorite Molly drawing I've done so far. Not just for this project, but also just for this year in general. I'm really happy with the way this turned out. I'm really happy with the way the background turned out. It really does feel like it's the fruit of me really paying attention to paying attention to and studying the Molly McGee style, and it gave me a lot of confidence going forward. But it did leave me a little bit fatigued. I did feel very, very tired in regards to this project. It did leave me kind of Molly McGee'd out in an extent. And there's another thing that kind of exacerbated that, but we'll get to that in a bit. But I am really happy with the live stream. The live stream was really fun. I'm not sure if this is the final figure between both the stream and the encore, but the whole thing ended up raising $15,566 for the Give the Kids the World Village charity. And that was really cool. It was really cool to be able to contribute to a good cause. I also helped out with their other campaign, Operation Unbridled Truths, which ended up raising $1,600 for the Autism I can't speak today. The Autism Self-Advocacy Network in June. The team was helping to sell some June Chen plushies, and they were able to raise some money for that as well. And I'm still on the team, and I'm still helping out with stuff, and it's been really cool. I really like hanging out with a bunch of other Molly McGee fans, and I love contributing art. A lot of people on that team and in the Discord even helped out, giving me some advice in some other comics that we're going to talk about later in this video. So yeah, I'm really proud of the work that everyone's done. Everyone did a really good job. I'll try and get a link to the live stream. A lot of people were on there. The voice actors for, I believe, Scratch, Daryl, Ollie, and Jeff were on the stream, as well as the creators and a couple of artists and stuff. And it was really cool. It was a really cool stream. And I think you should check out all the efforts of all the other people and artists who joined up. I'll probably give a link to like the YouTube channel that's hosted on and stuff. Yeah, but you should check it out. It was a lot of fun. And I'm excited for the future of this team and everything else we're going to be able to achieve and help people out with. So yeah, the live stream did have a massive influence in my progression as an artist. It helped me to kind of slow down and have more confidence in my line work and to be more methodical in planning out my sketches. And I also grew a lot in how I drew Molly. There's a couple of other like drawings I made this year outside of the comic that I think, like, in contrast to how I drew Molly last year, really shows my growth as an artist. And I don't know, I was really happy with how everything turned out in regards to that project too. Another big influence on the comic was the end of the show. It definitely came as a big surprise for me personally that the show wouldn't be getting another season, and the subsequent 2 finale episodes, they really hit hard. I mean, I wasn't bawling, crying or anything, but like, you know, they were otherwise very satisfying episodes, and it was a little disappointing to see the show go. I don't know, it was kind of sad, I guess you could say. I really felt like I was getting really invested in the show, and I felt like I put a lot of effort into finding a lot of the fun things about the show. I was really skeptical at the beginning. I wasn't like hating the show or anything, but like, you know, it didn't feel like it was like this really unique thing. And it really felt like I really grew to really love and appreciate the show, and it really felt like a distinct inspiration. So, you know, it was really sad. It's a little bit different compared to some other finales I remember. I remember feeling particularly down about the Adventure Time finale or the OKKO finale, or I don't know, like some other shows or whatever. But this one hit a little bit differently just because of the context at which a lot of other Disney Channel shows are still suffering from, just the overall lack in faith from the company in regards to these shows, them, like, you know, being gutted and not being able to tell their stories, having various episodes be censored for rather ridiculous reasons, and, you know, just overall, it just felt like the company was like otherwise destroying the morale of its artists and not allowing their stories to be told. I just felt like even though the show was able to get an ending, it just felt like, you know, at least from the stuff that I heard from it, it felt like, you know, they had to pull a lot of strings just to get an ending. And I don't know, it just sucks. I mean, I remember stuff like the Owl House and Wander getting treated rather unfairly. And then like shows like Moon Girl and Haley's on it, like, you know, not being able to finish up and stuff. I don't know. I just think it's kind of miserable that like you have people on, like, you know, writers and storyboard artists on social media being like, man, you gotta watch this show on Disney Plus or Netflix or whatever, so we can get a lot of views and we can convince the higher ups that we can get a 3rd season. Like, I don't know. I mean, if people were really liking the show, why can't you like renew? Like, I don't know. It wasn't just the events of the episode that made me feel really miserable, but it was also the context at which the episodes were coming out for, right? It kind of felt like not just like the end of an era, but also just sort of like representing the faith, the lack of faith that the company had in its artists and in the work that they were producing. And I don't know, it was a little bit sad. I felt like, if things were a little bit different, we'd still be, we'd still be anticipating Molly McGee episodes or Haley's On It episodes or whatever, And it got me to think a lot about not just the show, but also this comic as well, and, the passage of time and stuff, and, this whole idea of like, this comic being a time capsule for a specific era of comics, and, wondering, if I ever decide to say, put these comics in a zine or whatever, will people remember them? Will people be alienated because, people are growing up watching a different pantheon of Disney Channel shows or whatever? I don't know, it just made me really introspective in ways that make me feel a little bit uncomfortable. Yeah, I don't know, it was just kind of a weird feeling realizing that Molly McGee was over, It was a little bit sad. I don't know. I wasn't sure if I was really a big fan of the Jinx episode, but the last episode, the end, that was a really fantastic episode. Maybe I'll elaborate more on my thoughts on the show and those particular episodes in another video or something. But yeah, it did sort of take a lot of wind out of me developing the comic. But on a lighter note, ponies. So I think one of the biggest flaws with the first video being non-scripted is that I tend to really forget a lot of points. And one of the things I forgot to talk about when I was talking about things that influenced me was talking about specific things that influenced me. So I wanted to take this brief moment in the last bits of this inspiration section to talk about Horse Comics. Punkit, I think that's how you pronounce their name. Yeah, so like I said before in the first video, I was inspired by a lot of like very wacky, zany Tumblr webcomics or whatever. And I felt like everybody was making all these like fun comic strips for all these different shows, and I was like, I wonder, it feels like no one ever writes these kinds of comics for stuff like Molly McGee or Amphibia or something. And I saw this one comic called Horse Comics, which was it was a My Little Pony fan comic, which was just these characters hanging out and doing goofy stuff. And I'm gonna be frank with you, I don't go here. I don't know anything about these characters. I don't watch this show or whatever, but I don't know. I just find this set of comics really endearing. I think there's a lot of nuance to this approach to comic creation and art, and like the art direction for this comic, that I don't know. I think it'd be fun to make a big old retrospective or analysis of the art direction of this comic, because it's really cool. I think the biggest thing you can notice with the art style is the sense of contrast. There's a huge focus on multimedia and using the different art styles and mediums to create contrast of emotion. I think the biggest example you could see this is the famous Weed Brownie comic, where one of the characters is shown as like a figurine. And I think like it emphasizes the distinct volume of emotion going on. This distinct contrast, not just in the quality in which the characters are drawn, but the vast range of art styles that are being used. Overall, in general, I just really like how frantic the writing is, and like how bespoke the facial expressions are in general. It's just, I don't know. I'm actually just like looking at some of these drawings right now. I don't know. It's mad fun, and I don't know. I was kind of just like, it's really fun to read something and just be like, dude, I want to make stuff. I want to make stuff like this. This is really fun. I don't know. I just think that there's something really distinct about. I really love that sense of contrast. Even though these drawings are really simple, there is a real sense of confidence in the line work and a real distinct sense of intentionality with composition of how the characters are laid out in regards, and also the space of panels to emphasize jokes and spacing in dialogue and stuff. I don't know. I don't know if what I'm saying is really vague, and I'm sure whoever's reading, like watching this, probably already has read these comics before. But like, I don't know. There's this real distinct energy to all of these comics that are just really fun, and like, I don't know. And it's like, I don't know. I just think these comics are really fun, and there's a real distinct sense of energy, a real distinct sense of manic energy. I do want to say though that it definitely did get me to question my own approach to writing. I think one thing you could notice, especially when you compare these comics to my comics, is that no one's shooting each other in the face with guns or anything. Horse Comics is distinctly nicer than some of my own comics. My own influences are stuff like Billy and Mandy and Chowder and Teen Titans Go and stuff like that. Those are some of my influences in regards to writing my own comic. So sometimes my comics feel like they slant a little bit meaner. One of my favorite phenomenons, I think this year I started creating a Twitter to mirror the comic. And one of my favorite things in the entire world is whenever a Dipper comic shows up and everyone freaks out about how mean he is. It never stops being funny. Everyone be like, oh my goodness, Dipper would never do that. It's always really funny. And I don't know if anyone's like in on the joke or not, right? I don't know, but it's something that I've thought about a lot. And I think, it isn't fun to, be dissecting another person's work and use it as a means to criticize your own work, but I do think it is a distinct triumph that they're able to create this comic that has this amount of like manic energy without divulging into being too mean-spirited, I think it's a distinct accomplishment, right? Because I think it's really easy for some stuff that's kind of fun to sometimes feel a little bit too soft and have not a lot of bite to it. But I don't know. I think Horse Comics is really fun. I'll link their link tree and stuff so you can support them on their other projects and stuff, and you can read the rest of these comics there. But yeah, Horse Comics was a distinct inspiration for Molly McGee Image of the Week in a lot of ways, not just in art style, but also in writing and just art philosophy in general, like my approach to thinking about art. And it's a really fun comic that continues to inspire. And I think this is a pretty good segue into talking about 2024's comics. So let's get into that. I usually count how many times I keep on saying let's get into that to transition into the next section. All right, so now we're going to talk about comics. So first we're going to talk about a lot of the miscellaneous comics, and then afterwards we'll go over the two long-form comics that I was able to make this year. I think one of the interesting things about this year for comics was that there was a larger focus on connected storylines, like comics that were grouped together by a specific gag or a specific joke that transcends not just one comic, but strings them together and have a relationship with each other. I guess the first thing we can do kind of to segue from Horse Comics is probably talk about the Forever Weed Brownie. So one distinct comic from that series is the infamous Forever Weed Brownie comic that I think has turned into a little tradition of people redrawing that comic with different characters. And I thought to myself, I think it would be kind of fun if I could did that for this comic as well. I kind of just randomly chose two characters. I decided to have the characters feature Anne and Luce. The preamble to this comic, I did a little tier list. I did a tier list where I rated which characters smoked weed. The big gag of that tier list was that I thought it would be funny if these characters, there's only, you make a huge tier list full of characters and only one of them is smokes weed or whatever. I thought that was I thought that was a fun gag. But yeah, that was kind of the build up to the Forever Weed Brownie build up or whatever. That was the thing that built that whole thing up, was that one tier list. And so yeah, I don't know. What weirdly enough happened was this segue into like a huge, like 4 or 5 different comics about marijuana for some reason. And it's weird how like almost all of them are like probably my favorite comics I made for this year. For some reason. Once again, I'm actually really happy with the line art on the first one. I really like this one bit where Luce realizes she ate a weed brownie. I like this drawing of Luce that I did on the side. I don't know. I think this was a really fun. This particular comic was really fun. It also starts the trend. Well, I don't know. I don't say it starts. Yeah, I'd say it starts the trend of me exploring concepts with color. One of the things that which was also a challenge last year, was trying to figure out how I want to approach coloring, because full color comics were always like this huge thing, but I didn't want to just keep them like blank or whatever. I wanted there to be like a pop of color. And so this is my first time fiddling around with gradient maps and stuff. I'll talk about gradient maps a little bit more going into like the larger comics, but yeah. The next one was one I was working a really, really long time on, and it was this one Owl House comic. It's fun because there's a whole lot of different layers to it. For one thing, I really liked writing stories that were encased in specific moments for characters, right? So the whole gag for this comic was that this takes place during the first part of season 3 or whatever, where everyone's on Earth or whatever, and everyone's hanging out in Luce's basement, and they're all like hanging out and they have a discussion about what things they would wish for. I don't know. I had a lot of fun researching all the characters' outfits and stuff, and it was another one of those fun things, kind of once again building off of the stuff I appreciate about horse comics, was this contrast between my own art style and trying to emulate the Owl House art style. Earlier this year, I did a video about the Owl House finale, and another one of my favorite pieces I did this year was the thumbnail where I drew Luce and Gus together in their outfits in the finale, and that was another challenge of trying to emulate the Owl House art style. I don't know how successful I am, not just with the thumbnail, but with this comic in particular. It was a fun challenge. I don't know if the gag got through, because I don't know if there's a massive contrast between my art style and my attempt at emulating the Owl House art style, but that was kind of the effect I wanted to go for, right? This contrast between the reaction of this character and the reactions of the other characters, right? A contrast between how they viewed the idea that everyone was wishing for weed or whatever. I wanted to focus on that contrast, and I just thought it was, I don't know, I think when I first drew this comic, I wasn't a big fan of how I drew Camilla, but I don't know, this is another one of my favorites. I like this one a lot. Let me see here. The next the next part of this weird marijuana saga was this other one. Everyone really liked this one. This one weird one where Luce reveals that Star from Star vs. stole her bong. I don't know. I'm really happy with the pacing of the last 3 panels, with the final punchline, and I also really like this approach for the palette that I did. It's way more simpler than the very first Weed Brownie comic, but I still think this one looks a little bit nicer. And I'm also happy with the line art and my approach to drawing these characters. Yeah, so that was, yeah. Can you believe that there's going to be like more, there are going to be more Weed comics? And the last, I wouldn't say, no. Yeah, I think this one's the last one. There was like only 4 of these. There are only 4 of these. The last one that I made was this one weird one where Molly's trying to continue this weed gag, and Anne thinks it isn't funny. And then Molly has a weird ego trip about people not thinking she's funny. This is another one where I was experimenting with different brushes. I really liked the idea of giving the comic a sort of watercolor sort of feel. So I used a watercolor brush. I found a really fun watercolor brush on my hunt for free brushes and stuff. My continual hunt for brushes that I actually like to use in Procreate. And yeah, I liked this one a lot. It's another one where I really liked the idea of having those black fills for the mouths, and I also really liked the line art. I don't know what is up with the text though. For some reason I didn't draw word bubbles. But yeah, for some reason a majority of the comics that I made this year were mostly kind of interconnected comics. I don't know, it's really interesting. It was really weird. Another set of comics that I did a set of comics focusing on some rivalries, right? There was a weird focus on rivalries this year, which I like a lot. I think more than anything, I think it's really funny to have characters that don't like each other from different franchises rather than trying to make them friends. And I think a lot of that has always been like trying to find the weirdest rivalries. I think stuff like that has always been really funny to me personally. One of the ones that I set up this year was, a little bit later in the year, was a collection of 3 comics revolving around Sasha from the Owl House having a rivalry with Sasha from Amphibia having a rivalry with Gus from the Owl House. So this one's going to be a weird one to explain, but essentially the whole gag with this one was it was a follow-up on some of my old ideas I had in regards to fan comics. So one of the ideas I had for fan comics was I wanted to do a couple of strips dedicated to My Hero Academia. And one of the ideas I had for exploring the characters was re-examining the relationship between Bakugo and Deku. I had this really funny idea of Deku being kind of this weird SpongeBob XP, where he's just like this really positive, super excitable guy who like wants to be friends with everybody. But I had this idea about him having this like weird like sardonic slant where he'd say like something really stupid to get a rise out of Bakugo, and he did this intentionally. He pretended to be an idiot to try and piss him off because he had a lot of fun messing with him, but Bakugo thought he was just an idiot. Like that, I don't know, I just thought that was a really fun idea. I thought like, because there's a lot of characters who fall into that sort of like SpongeBob range, right? Even Molly falls into that, where like you have this really excitable character, and then maybe there's also another character who doesn't like them. And I thought it would be kind of a fun twist to write a character who liked messing with this grumpy character on purpose, and the grumpy character wasn't aware of the fact that they're being messed with. Yeah, this was in a contrast to a comic that I'm going to be talking about later in the video, the Picnic Prize Fights story arc, where we had Sasha and Hunter from the Owl House being rivals. And in that comic, Hunter is very much on the back foot. They have this very much equal rivalry where like they're both like at each other. They're both very much aware they're both like in competition with each other. But Sasha's usually the one who's usually winning those fights. And I thought it would be funny. I thought it would be really funny to have her face off someone who like is not at all, is completely like phased by her. The whole entire idea behind this concept was I think it's really easy for me personally, as someone who hasn't seen the Owl House in a while since it's ended, to write Gus as an idiot, because I guess for me the one thing I remember the most about him is that he's always getting stuff wrong about Earth, because he's this guy who's like he's in the Boiling Isles and he doesn't know anything about Earth, so he has all these weird ideas about what Earth and Earthlings are like. And I was like, yeah, that's not really like entirely true. He's not like a big moron or anything. In fact, there's a lot of episodes that prove how incredibly clever he is. So I kind of wanted to feed into that, and I liked the idea of like also him being kind of like a theater kid or whatever. At least I remember him being a theater kid. Like this idea of him like kind of like pretending to be a moron and saying all kinds of weird stuff. I just think it's a really fun like character dynamic, and I just really liked I liked the idea of like, you know, someone trying to get a rise out of Sasha. I have a lot of ideas for this concept. I don't think it's ever going to balloon into like a larger story like, you know, the Sasha and Hunter story, but I don't know. I think this is a really fun dynamic. Another really weird rivalry was Molly and Cricket. So this one's similar to the Molly Dipper dynamic in that I want it to be a segue into a larger story involving Cricket, Though unlike the eventual Dipper story that I'm going to be writing, this one isn't very like, this one doesn't feel like it's the preamble to something more sincere. It's very much the build up to another really, really dumb joke that I really want to write. But the short of it is that this was another one where I was really trying to examine what fun possibilities we could have with these characters. It is very weird to see Molly angry with somebody, even in the show. And even then, those bouts of anger and jealousy are always about something really absurd, like her hatred of magicians, or those very early moments where like she got kind of jealous of Andrea for doing more charity work than her or something. And so I think I wanted to lean into that. I thought, okay, it's really funny. I like the idea of like if Molly is going to be having a rivalry with somebody, it has to be something really random. Yeah, it's kind of like, because I don't know, I think that's kind of what makes, when you think about like SpongeBob, right, and those very early appearances of Bubble Bass, right? Like the idea of SpongeBob having a rivalry with somebody, and that in and of itself is a really funny joke. The idea of this like happy-go-lucky, friendly character just randomly hating one person is really funny. And so I thought it would be funny to have Molly have this really random rivalry with Cricket from Big City Greens. Because, like, I don't know, because it's like if there's anybody, if Molly's gonna have a rivalry, if Molly's gonna have this deep-seated hatred for anybody, I think it's gonna be something really random and bizarre. And so I thought it would be funny if it was Cricket. And like I said before, there is a reason why they're rivals, but that's the build-up to another story. So I just thought, I want to explore this concept a bit. And I don't know, I just thought it's another one where I just think it's really funny. I am excited to do more stuff with Cricket. I actually intentionally started a watch through of Big City Greens so I could get his character right, because I feel like I'd have a lot more material to work with if I actually knew a little bit more about this character. But yeah, I had a lot of fun with these ones. This is another one. I really loved the last the last comic I made of this bit of Molly and Cricket. It was another one where I want to challenge myself to draw it, as because for me personally, I think it's really funny where like you have a character say or do something really weird and they're drawn like as close to the art style as possible. I don't think anyone's ever picked up on this, but this is like this was based on like a weird Mario Golf render that I used to see all the time of like Daisy about to swing, Princess Daisy swinging a golf club, and it looks like she's about to hit a toad. I don't know. It was a really funny render, and I wanted to redraw it. Yeah, so that was another weird one. I want to do more stuff like this in the future. This has always been, for me, the thing that I loved the most about making this comic has been trying to re-explore character relationships and stuff. It's really easy to like write stories about characters being best friends, but then like you don't have a whole lot of conflict. It's not that funny. So I think it's really fun to write stories about characters like having weird rivalries with each other. Yeah, and I think it's just really interesting that I took this approach in general. I think my biggest inspiration for this approach has been a lot of old comics. You know, like when I was a kid, we used to get the newspaper a lot, and I used to read, you know, Garfield and Calvin and Hobbes and Peanuts and stuff. And whenever I used to get those collections of books at the library, I always used to see that these comics would sometimes have various strips kind of linked together in like kind of like an arc, essentially. And I always really liked that approach to having these comics and these gags kind of build on each other. I don't know, it'd be really annoying to try and find an example of this, but there's one Peanut strip I remember. I'm trying to remember where, like, I think it's something about like Snoopy like throwing Linus's blanket over the fence to the neighbor's cat, and like him, like Linus, Snoopy, Woodstock all fight the cat for the for the blanket, and they all like all of them lose except for like Woodstock, who's able to successfully fight the cat off. And it's just a huge string of like everybody like leaving the fight lost or whatever. It was a really funny. It's like one of those Peanuts, like collection of Peanut strips that I remember the most, and that was kind of the inspiration for the very first story arc for this year. Yeah, so real briefly, I before we get into like the big serialized stuff, I did do a series of comics about the weird worm query. Would you still love me if I were a worm? That was another one of those things where it's like I liked the idea of building on these different gags with different characters asking the question and answering them. Yeah, I that's always been the thing that I liked the most about writing these comics, has been just trying to explore fun new ways to examine characters and explore their personalities. Going forward, it has been a challenge though, because sometimes I'll come up with fun concepts for character stories, but I have to find a way to build up like an actual narrative to build up that concept, right? That's always been the big problem with me writing stories about other people's characters rather than making up my own characters. In my original stories, I can pretty easily create a narrative that allows me to tell the story that I want to tell or progress the characters in the way that I want to progress. But in regards to creating fan fiction or fan comics or whatever, I'm working within the confines of an already established world and story, right? So there's all kinds of different other mechanics that I have to make sense of. Also, the mechanics that I am developing for my own story as well. So a lot of times I'll have an idea of like, oh man, wouldn't it be funny if I did this or that or whatever? One example that I don't know if I'm still gonna do or not, I had a really fun idea about a story about Ida and Grunkle Stan. And the whole gag was that Daryl was helping both Ida and Stan con people better. And so Ida and Stan were getting into a fight as to who's going to keep Daryl essentially as their assistant. I recognized that like I had a really fun punchline for that comic. My biggest problem with that was that I didn't have a good way of like, okay, so like one of the things I've never really like outright explained is that, okay, so because I didn't do a really good job of like relaying the overall like points of this comic, right? So the whole thing is that Molly is a character who's able to travel to different dimensions, the different dimensions of these other Disney Channel shows. And because of this power, she's the only one who can travel between the dimensions or whatever. It's something I've never explained, but the whole idea is that whenever you see two characters from two different shows hanging out in a comic, Molly is somewhere in the background because she's the one who brought them together. So my main thing was like, okay, I have that in the back of my mind. How do I write what would justify these characters being together? They can't just show up together. There needs to be a reason as to why they're together, a reason why Molly's bringing everybody together to hang out. There needs to be a reason why. And that's always been something that's always been a challenge for coming up with stories, because I'd always be like, okay, so why are these characters hanging out in any way? You know what I mean? I have to like justify why these characters are standing next to each other because of the premise that I've developed. And that's always been kind of a big challenge for me in regards to writing this comic. And one way I was trying to circumvent that was with the introduction of the very first long-form comic I made for this year, which was Picnic Prize Fights. This comic started out essentially with the idea of examining Sasha from Amphibia and Hunter from the Owl House. I thought to myself, the most interesting thing about Sasha and Hunter is that in a lot of ways they're very similar and very different. For Sasha, she's someone who commands respect and takes it without asking. She's someone who forces change on the world, who imposes her will on other people to get what she wants. She's very much this immovable object. She's someone who commands a lot of respect from people and is able to make a lot of waves in the world of Amphibia because of that distinct confidence. Inversely, Hunter is someone who, at least as far as I remember, is someone who's distinctly desperate for validation or like respects. You know, he's someone who wants to be a part of the Golden Guard and wants to be like this really well-known soldier or whatever, and you know, do the will of like Emperor Belus or whatever. He's someone who wants to be well respected and will go to great lengths to gain that respect. Puts a lot of pride in his effectiveness of being able to do his job well as a part of the Golden Guard. And so for me, he's like this is something that, at least as far as I remember watching Owl House, something that motivates him distinctly. And so I thought to myself, it would be really funny if we had these two characters clashing, this immovable object versus this unstoppable force. Hunter's persistence versus Sasha's willpower, essentially. And so I wanted to write a story about these two characters getting into a fight, essentially. The first iteration of this story, I think I had like, it was essentially, the idea was that like Molly was hanging out with a bunch of side characters, right? So it was like Sylvia from Wander Over Yonder, Seuss from Gravity Falls, and then Sasha and Hunter, and they're all hanging out for some reason. There was some thing that they had to get done, some sort of mission, right? And Sasha and Hunter were like constantly bickering with each other and getting into fist fights, and essentially everyone else had to help them get along so that they could finish up this mission or whatever. Like I stated before, the big problem was that I had to figure out a reason as to why these characters were hanging out with each other, because of the premise of the fact that Molly is the person who's bringing all these characters together. I had to figure out a reason as to why these characters would be coming together. And eventually I realized that I didn't really like the idea of justifying that. A lot of that has to do with the fact that I'm not at a point where the big thing that sets up the whole serialization part of this comic, the long form story that I wanted to tell, that aspect hasn't shown up yet. So I haven't been able to figure out a way to incorporate that so that moves stories. And so sometimes I have a lot of situations that like work off of that loose idea I'm trying to develop, but can amount to something that actually substantiates itself as like an actual story. Another idea I had that I thought was really funny, there was another idea I had that was, involved the big story that I want to tell, that involved all these characters having to group together and go to different dimensions to stop a whole bunch of different bad guys or whatever. I think they were all waiting for Molly to do something, right? So all these characters were like in different dimensions or whatever, and Hunter shows up at the McGee house, right? He's waiting for Molly for some reason, and while he's waiting, he decides to just do a bunch of chores. And so like Molly's parents are seeing him, and they don't have any context for what's going on, so they just see him like washing the dishes and vacuuming and stuff, and they're kind of freaked out, like, what's this random dude doing in our house, and why is he cleaning our dishes? And I thought that was the most interesting part of that idea I had. That was the most fleshed out idea. So essentially what I decided to do was to combine those two ideas. This idea of Hunter and Sasha feuding, and then Hunter hanging out at the McGee house and doing chores, and combine them into one story. And I decided to have the whole underlying story was that Molly was setting up some sort of picnic in her backyard and inviting a whole bunch of people. And so she decides to invite all these people together and then have them show up, and then like Hunter and Sasha eventually fight when they get to the picnic. So yeah, the first part of this comic is the idea is that Hunter is the first person. He's unusually early to this picnic, and so while he's waiting, he's just like doing a whole bunch of random stuff while he's waiting for everyone to show up at the picnic. And so like the idea is that eventually Sasha does show up, and they immediately start throwing hands. Yeah, first things first, I really like this cover. I really like the approach to lighting for this cover that I did. I do think that the background is really busy, and in the future I want to try and avoid doing these really crazy backgrounds. But I do like the approach to lighting. I've been doing this thing where like I do this massive, huge shadow on top of the individual shadows that the light source is producing. So it does give this real sense that there's a huge amount of light behind these characters. It's another one where I was really happy with the line art. And yeah, I really liked this cover. Going into the actual art itself, not the biggest fan. This arc took me a really long time to draw. And so some of these pages are kind of inconsistent. Similar to my issues with in the previous video that I mentioned with the Headlights arc, there's a lot of parts where I skimped out on doing backgrounds. I recognize that I probably should have been doing more backgrounds for the last arc, and that was another challenge for me. Because I don't know, once again I was trying to experiment with how much did I want to approach how much did I want to work with how I released these comics, like strip by strip. Would I do them like story chunks, or would I like release each one like a page at a time, and then how long would it be, like each day, or would it be like each week? And so this comic dragged on a long time, and I think my art kind of suffered for this one, mostly because I was trying to juggle also how long it would take for me to release each page. And I realized that like I wasn't really sure, so I couldn't have it where like I was working on it as a page at a time, where like, you know, I create the page and then I upload, and then I create another page and I upload that separately. So my main goal was to get everything done all at once, and I wasn't too big of a fan of how I approach. I mean, I do think that my work is distinctly better than my last long form comic, the Headlights arc, but a lot of the line art and a lot of my sketches that I had were really rushed, which resulted in kind of an inconsistent look. And in retrospect, I'm not the biggest fan of this color palette that I used, this weird sort of fleshy pink kind of look. I did want it to contrast with the distinct focus of blue in the last story arc, but in general, I feel like, I don't know, everything kind of blurs together a little bit more. It's a little bit hard to read. Yeah, so essentially like I mentioned before, this comic was not only just the combination of two old ideas, but it was also kind of like following that philosophy that I liked from those older comic strips, where the story was really a collection of various gags, you know, Sasha and Hunter getting into these weird fights and stuff. Yeah. And obviously there's, I don't know, I like, once again, it's one of my favorite things about writing these comics is exploring these different dynamics, right? Like, it's fun to have, we have the core cast, right? But it's also fun to incorporate a lot of the side characters, like we have the McGees at the beginning, the Molly's parents freaking out at like Hunter mowing their lawn, and then we also have Daryl like taking bets on whether or not Sasha and Hunter will win. That was a fun one. In fact, I think that this one particular panel, I really liked the Daryl that I drew here. It was a really fun Daryl drawing. Yeah, and then we also had another instance of Mabel showing up in the next one. Once again, I don't know. I really like this particular gag. I think my favorite part of this comic was like the original ending. So like, Molly's very much concerned about the fact that these guys are fighting, and she doesn't like the fact that they supposedly hate each other. And I thought it would be really funny if the big punchline was actually that they're friends and they like each other and that they just like beating each other up. So I initially had this idea of like the comic literally ending with them yelling at Molly, telling her to get lost, that they're ruining her vibe. But I was like, I don't know. That's not really a nice ending. I thought it was funny, but I thought, it's kind of a weird ending. So I decided to have a little part where they thank her for bringing them together and helping them be friends and stuff. I still really like the initial ending, but I figured it'd be kind of fun to wrap it up a little bit more cohesively. Even though like I like the comic at the end, I really feel like it was a result of overall because the main issue with my first arc was a lot of procrastination. Once again, like I really wanted this comic to do really well, and a big problem sometimes is that when you get into that perfectionist mindset, you tend to kind of wait up too long. You spend a lot of time trying to figure out your approach to doing something rather than just doing it. It's really easy for me to forget that the whole point of me making this comic was to learn how to make comics, and so by proxy my first work is not going to be the best. But at the same time, sometimes you think to yourself, this is my only time I'm going to try and approach this type of concept, and you want it to be the best thing that you want it to be, because it's not just about impressing other people. I also like this comic as well, and I also reread my comics a lot, and I want to read something that's of a good quality. Yeah, so that was always kind of a problem, but I do really like this overall story, and it does highlight something particularly that I like in regards to this project, which is being able to re-examine Disney Channel characters and explore their characters in this new facet or whatever. And I think the next thing I'd like to go over would be the other comic I decided to do, which is The Story So Far, which is supposed to be the setup to the big the big long form story that I wanted to do with this comic. So like I said, like it's actually a really big problem I've been trying to deal with, is that I haven't been doing a very good job of explaining this comic. I should have said this in the beginning, but Molly McGee Image of the Week is a fan comic that I've been developing. The whole conceit of the comic is that Molly is a big fan of Disney Channel. She loves everything Disney. She's a big fan of all these shows, and she thought it would be fun to create a fun little fan comic of all these characters. And she soon realizes not only can she travel to their worlds, but she can also affect their world. She has immense amount of power to shape reality with her art. And so I thought it would be fun to write this comic about the relationship Molly has with these other characters that she looks up to, and trying to be big heroes just like they are. There's a few different influences on this story. The first thing is like I mentioned before, I haven't been doing a very good job of explaining the whole conceit of this comic. One, because the whole, Master of the Universe concept was developed really while I started the comic, because I thought it would be a funny gag, and it didn't really come up until the first comic, right? And even then, it wasn't a concept that I really developed all that well. The idea of Molly being able to influence reality by drawing a comic or whatever. This concept of this power that she has, right? It's something I'm going to have to figure out a better way of explaining. Another issue is that, obviously, of course, these comics are based off of different TV shows, and I've never really given an explanation as to how these other shows work. They all have their own set of lore and logic that governs their worlds, and I've never really explained any of them and how they fit into the story. That's going to be a real pain, and I'm going to have to figure out how to deal with, especially with the next story that I'm going to be writing, which very much relies on you knowing how Gravity Falls ends, right? I'm going to have to figure out a way to explain all of that, and that's kind of a big problem. And this comic was sort of an attempt to try and set up the foundations of the comic, and also set up the emotional journey that I want to re-explore with Molly. I think something that I explored in the Scratch video was that I think it's really interesting whenever you have Molly on the down foot. When Molly loses in the show, I think is really interesting. When her confidence in herself and her enthusiasm gets challenged, I think those are really interesting stories, and I want to write a story like that for Molly, where her confidence gets challenged in a distinct way. Another big influence on not just the story but the comic as a whole was the perception of Molly McGee. I remember when the Owl House ended, people were like, "Oh, it's the death of storytelling in Disney Channel shows. There's no more serialized shows. It's just only goofy shows or whatever." Shows with no lore or whatever. And it was really weird, right? It was weird because the shows that they were talking about, like, Haley's on it, and Molly McGee, and Moon Girl, these were all shows that people did have. These were shows that people, did have some form of serialization and character growth. And in the same way, it was weird because this really felt like a blast from the past. I remember back in the day, back when like Star Versus was out and Gravity Falls, there's always this sense that these shows with like lore and character development and character drama and stuff, these were real animation, real cartoon shows like Adventure Time and Star Versus and Gravity Falls. These were like Steven Universe. This was real animation and like fake kiddie animation like The Amazing World of Gumball or Uncle Grandpa. That stuff was derivative and didn't have any substance or whatever. And as someone who was a big fan of both types of shows, I felt really weird that everyone was creating that distinction, right? That The Amazing World of Gumball and Uncle Grandpa didn't have any value because they didn't have character development or they didn't have lore or whatever. It felt really weird when Gumball got canned, right? People that started like paying attention and caring about it because they started exploring with lore, exploring the concept of having lore instead of the various like hundreds of episodes where they're pushing the boundaries of art or whatever. I don't know, it was just a really weird distinction, and it was weird seeing that crop up again with the end of Owl House and the beginning of Molly McGee. And so I thought it would be fun to try and really explore that concept within the conflict of the character. Have this idea that Molly feels like she can't compare to these other big heroes, and that, you know, all of her accomplishments don't mean anything compared to, you know, the likes of Anne or Wanda or Luce or Dipper or whatever, that her experiences mean less compared to these other big heroes or whatever. So a lot of this story was really about exploring that sense of imposter syndrome that I want to examine with Molly. Someone who feels like now that she can stand toe-to-toe with these big legends, she feels like she's not worthy, and I want to explore that concept with the character, the concept of, like, you know, just like exploring what makes Molly McGee as a character and as a show really special, and that, you know, you don't need to change yourself into this big tough guy in order to show that you're special or whatever. So yeah, those were the goals of the comic, to explore that character dynamic that I want to set up for future stories, and also to try and explore, like, you know, try and reintroduce the concept of the comic. So one of the things I wanted to try and do with this comic was explore the idea of the relationship between color and emotion. So one of the things I did really late in the process of developing this comic was explore color palettes. One of the things I don't like a lot about Procreate is that all of their blending modes are destructive, meaning that you can't say have have them be like layer blending modes. I'm not sure. I think I'm mixing them up, but the idea is that like stuff like gradient maps, right? You have to commit to having them. They can't be like on a different layer and affecting the layers below them. So essentially what I had to do was that, like, I had to basically compress the entire comic into one layer before I could commit to making a change in the gradients. And so what happens is that as I'm messing around with these gradients, a lot of the various changes in value and saturation tend to blur together with some of these pages, and you don't really get that distinction between the backgrounds and the characters. I think one example was this one where Luce shows up. I was messing around with the gradients so much that, like, it kind of feels like the characters, the line art, and the coloring really blur together, and it doesn't feel like there's that distinction between the characters in the background. All of the values of the colors kind of blend together, which was really frustrating. I think that was the one distinct problem page, but it was kind of an issue that really bothered me a lot. But I think once I was aware of this quirk of the gradient maps, I was able to do a better job of dealing with that in the subsequent pages. Much like the Headlights arc, this one was distinctly kind of working towards trying to be a little bit more genuine, trying to come from a place of sincerity, and it was a comic that I kind of procrastinated a little bit on. And yeah, it was another one of the things where it's like it was the stepping stones to something larger, and I wanted it to be something that would make it easy for people to understand the story that I wanted to tell. And I'm not really sure. I think the basics are there, right? But there's a lot of like nuances that I'm not sure are really easy for people to understand. Going back to that one Luce page, the whole idea of this bit was that, like, at this point in like the Owl House story, Luce hasn't bumped into any other humans yet, so she's supposed to be kind of confused as to why Molly's there. But for someone who's never watched the Owl House, I'm not sure if they're able to really pick up on that distinction I was trying to set up with this page, right? And even people who have watched the Owl House, I'm not sure if they really understand it. I think I didn't get a lot of reactions from this comic. I don't really have a clear understanding of how people feel about this comic, about whether or not they understood what's going on, or if they liked it or not, or if they're able to understand what I was trying to conceptualize with the story and character conflict. I guess maybe that's kind of the thing that's always kind of bugged me, right? Is that, like, I always kind of wish I had a clearer understanding of how people felt about these comics, and to get a gauge as to how people like feel or whether or not something's effective or not. I liked the comic. I really liked the approach, even with some of the flaws that I thought. I still feel like the emotional conflict lands a little bit, and it's something that I don't know, I just really liked a lot. Once again, I think it's just one of those things where, like, I feels like I'm making decisions based on how easy it will be to get this thing done rather than to make the best product. I think in general, I think maybe if I hadn't messed around with gradient maps and decided to commit to one distinct color palette, I'd probably have an easier time, and I think things would probably be more coherent to look at. At the same time, I do really like this approach. Like I said before, I wanted to try and explore the idea of having a changing palette to reflect Molly's specific emotions. So my idea was that in the beginning of the comic, everything's very warm and bright, very warm values and very bright lighting to highlight this distinct sense of anticipation for the future that Molly has, and and to some extent I have, for the beginning of this huge arc that I want to develop. And that's something that's reflective in the first few pages where she's exploring this, explaining this distinct story that she's about to tell. And then things eventually, once we get to the part where they're going on this picnic or whatever, and things slow down, things move on to being darker and cooler to kind of explore this sense of isolation that she feels with these friends that she's developed, and this growing sense that she's not on the same level as all of them, and that she doesn't belong. And I don't know, I was really happy with the specific pages. I think in general it was just kind of like a lack of understanding of how gradient maps worked. And yeah, I think from that approach, I'm happy with that, but I think going forward, I really do like the idea of doing more like normal backgrounds, normal coloring. This is another one where I took a long time on, simply because it wasn't a really big story. I was afraid of feeling kind of cheesy. I was afraid of this feeling confusing. And yeah, that was just kind of something that really frustrated me. I wasn't really sure how to approach that. So that was kind of it. I am distinctly happy. I have to say, if there's one thing I really love a lot, it has to be the cover. I think this is probably one of my favorite covers that I created. One of my favorite covers that I created for a comic so far. It really just highlights the kind of distinction I wanted to create. This contrast between, my style and the traditional styles of the other characters. Originally, all of the characters were going to be drawn with more accurate art styles, but I thought it would be fun to create this distinction between my style and Molly's style. Sort of like this distinction between how she, this dissonance between how she views herself and how she views her friends and stuff. Yeah, it was really fun. I really wanted to feel like this momentous event that would coincide with a new beginning for the comic. And so even though it had a bit of flaws, I'm still overall really happy, and I'm really excited to build off of this story that I developed in the future. Real quickly before we wrap up, I just wanted to go over a couple of things that I learned from this year, as well as some goals for next year. So in general, I am happy with how my line art has progressed as this year has gone on. I feel like a lot of the line work for a lot of these comics has gotten way more confident, and my shapes that I've been developing in my drawings have been a lot more clearer. In general, I'm feeling way more comfortable drawing these characters than I was last year, and I'm happy with that. I think my biggest problem has definitely been trying to have more discipline in regards to developing my sketches and the amount of time it takes for me to create more clear art. I think sometimes it feels like I rush too much in regards to developing my sketches, and so even though the line art might be nice, the foundation for these drawings might not be the best. And so that's something that I've been trying to focus on a little bit more. Alongside that, I've also wanted to try and develop more of a discipline in creating the queue, creating the backlog of comics and stuff. It's kind of been an issue with a lot of the other projects I've been working on in regards to that, trying to create a collection of stuff so that I could have an issue come out for each week of the year. That's kind of been the goal. And alongside other creative projects and in real life stuff, it's just been kind of hard, so much so that I've actually had to set up a hiatus for the comic so that I can hopefully come back in, say, April 2025 and start stuff again. And I think the biggest thing for me personally has been, at least the biggest thing that I want to start working on in 2025 has been focusing on creating scripts. It's something that I don't think I've ever done for writing a comic. So many of the comics have just been, I've just gone straight in. A lot of that has to do with the fact that like the specific way things are laid out have always just been running around in my brain. And so I've essentially kind of memorized how I want the comics to look, right? But I think I'd have an easier job conceptualizing the base sketches of these comics if I committed to myself creating thumbnails and scripts. But once again, it's one of those things where it's like, it's very much the crippling, polarizing anxiety of not wanting things to look weird or cringe or imperfect. Like when you're putting things down on paper, you're very much aware of the fact that you're creating something imperfect. And so sometimes that paralyzes you. I think that's the word I wanted to use, is, the paralyzation or whatever. And so that's always been a challenge with writing scripts, trying to create something that feels cohesive, right? That feels like that feels cohesive and tangible, feels like, it feels like something that's working towards some sort of narrative ending or something. My biggest problem has mostly been that it's just easy to kind of just go off of your memory rather than developing a script and re-examining all of that. And because I want 2025 to like kick off with a bang and kick off the next arc with a good start, it's one of those things I've been trying to work towards. I've actually started developing a script for the next issue, and that has also it's come with a lot of its own challenges, mostly because like the exciting part is drawing, right? And so you want to get to that part and you want to focus on that. In general, I think a lot of my core issues, or at the very least the hurdles I've had to overcome with this project, have really come from the fact that like, you really want to make something that's perfect, right? You want to make something that's great, something that's really cool. One of the things I've noticed, not just, creating art online and creating art, like, recognizing you're a part of a fandom, is that like you recognize the vast amount of talent and the vast range of talent online whenever you're creating art. And so there's always this sense that you kind of need to improve yourself all the time. And I think one of the things I need to like start working towards is recognizing that everyone's journey in regards to art is their own, and to not focus too much on the progress of other people and let that like, paralyze you and you don't make any progress and you don't draw anything. I think that's always been the problem. And sometimes it's easy to be in a position where you don't do anything, or you don't do anything because you're afraid of creating something imperfect. But I think you have to start and recognize that like, this is the stepping stone to something bigger, regardless of whether or not, you make something that, that isn't perfect, right? Like you take from that experience and you make something better in the future, even if the thing that you really want to be perfect isn't that perfect. So yeah, that's kind of the philosophy I want to have going forward, is having the confidence to make more mistakes. I guess sometimes it kind of feels like, especially someone for me who doesn't have a huge following, whose view count usually tends to fall in the single digits for whatever I make, there's always this larger sense that like I need to prove myself more, and I need to like focus more on trying to do as much as I can, as much as possible, so that I can, gain a larger following and be the best person I can possibly be. That can get kind of frustrating, right, and kind of exhausting. And so going forward, I want to kind of untether myself from that conflict, untether myself from feeling like I need to be upping the ante or everyone's going to forget about me or something, because I think that just leads to, sloppier art. I think a lot of my strongest pieces from this year have been stuff that I kind of just made without the intent of trying to impress anybody, stuff mostly made just to impress myself. One of the things that I didn't mention this before, but I drew this commemorative piece for the 100th page, and it's fun to kind of contrast that with the 50th page that I drew last year, and the wealth of range, like the range of quality I've grown between that drawing and the 100th page. I think that's the easiest way to put things into perspective, right? Is not looking at like, the present of other people, but the past of yourself, right? Not focusing on the prestige that other people have, but focusing on how much you've grown, and seeing the things that you've been able to improve upon, because it's easy when you're stuck in the present to only see only see the things that you need to work on, but when you focus but when you're able to retrospect a little bit and look at how much you've grown, you recognize that when you dedicate yourself, you're able to actually grow and develop as an artist. I spent a lot of time talking about the things I didn't like in a lot of these comics, but overall in general, compared to like my very first drawing of Molly that I did compared to say like the very last Molly that I drew, right? I think honestly I've grown a lot as an artist, honestly, and I've been able to make a lot of really great stuff. And yeah, in general, I think that's probably going to be the key to my success in 2025, is focusing less on trying to be perfect. I think that confidence and experience comes from making stuff more rather than waiting for the chance to be perfect, is spending more time just improving yourself. So those are my goals for 2025. Thank you so much for watching this video, and thank you so much for reading the comic. I've been having a lot of fun creating stuff, and I hope you enjoy, this little retrospective, and I hope I have a lot more stuff to show when I make this video again at the end of 2025. So like I said before in the beginning, I'll have a link to the comics and all the other places you can read it in the description, as well as links to a big live stream and all the other stuff that I mentioned in this video. So take care, and thank you so much for watching.